Hello, my name is Eric Paley. My wife, Stacy Paley, and I have been attending here since 2003. I've been involved in many activities in the church. We've worked with the youth, been on search committee, been on outreach, and most recently we were a part of a small group that I've been asked to tell you about how the group started and kind of what we did as a group. The group had its first meeting back in December 7th of 2008. We got together at Tim and Patty Steiger's house because there was a group of young Christians in this church that wanted to get together and grow in Christ and fellowship, and we felt that there was a good need for that in our church. And Tim and Patty were nice enough and crazy enough to be willing to meet with us weekly to take care of that. The small group, when we first met, we decided we wanted to do a very biblically based study. So we just opened up the Bible and went through the Bible. We didn't have a book study or anything like that. Sometimes we would talk for 2 hours about 2 verses. Sometimes we would do, several verses. We just really took our time to make sure that we had all the discussion that we needed over those verses to make sure that everybody understood what they needed to understand. It was growing. When the group first started, it was Tim and Patty led it. My wife Stacy and I were members of the group. Jessica and Adam Fink and Katie Beth and Eli. Those were the 3 core couples that made a commitment to start this group. Over the time, that group grew to include Matt and Heather, Kendra Irvin, Tom and Kara St. Meyer, Sally Barrett, Jeff, Jenny Dirk, Dave Rodriguez, Kelly Richard, Cynthia Smith, Chris and Ashley Eaton, Chad and Colleen Massoth, and Casey and Katie Braswell. When we originally started, we were 3 couples, and when we ended, we had all those people and 11 kids and 2 more on the way. So over the time we had over those years, there was definitely a lot of change in our group. As I said, we were basically a biblically based group. We went through Genesis, Job, Revelation, John, and James in 4 years just to get through those. So it kind of gives you an idea of how much we really discussed what we were doing. We wanted to get a lot out of it. It was a very discussion-based study, which is what we all felt that we needed at the time. It was we often had really good discussions, and part of that was because of the mixture of the group. People in our group, we had a pastor in our group. We had people who have been saved, over 40 years. We had people who have been recently been saved. We had a person get baptized while they were going to our small group. We had people that were raised, Catholic their whole life. We had people who were raised Pentecostal and Presbyterian, and people that weren't raised in the church. So it was really a good group with a lot of good discussion and a lot of good questions, because some of us understood things a different way or just didn't understand it at all. So we often had a lot of good questions. A typical meeting started at about 6:30. Usually in the early days, we'd meet at 6:30, fellowship for about a half hour or so, just getting to know and grow as a group in our dynamics and getting to know each other. So we'd do that for about a half hour. We'd have Bible study for about an hour, hour and a half. And then usually about 10 o'clock, Tim and Patty would kick us out of their house. As older people, they kind of wanted to go to bed a little earlier. But it was really enjoyable, having all that extra time, because we really got to know the people in our group. They in essence became a family. Most of us in this group aren't from Muncie. I think only maybe 1 or 2 of us even have family in Delaware County. So when something bad happened or something good happened, these are the people we relied on. So it was very important for us to build the friendships that we have. One case I can think of is when Katie Beth and Eli had their twins. They were born way early, and it wasn't a good deal. So as a group, we all got together. In fact, I think we met on Tuesdays. I don't even think it was a Tuesday night that we all got together at Tim and Patty's house and just met and prayed, and were there for a couple hours just praying for them. As brothers and sisters in Christ, we just grew together to embrace them. As we met, we started meeting. Like I said, we met weekly on Tuesday nights. And really, in those 4 years, probably each year, there were maybe only 4 or 5 weeks we didn't meet. Every summer, we talked about taking the summer off. We just never felt we should. We always just felt that we were close enough that it was like missing, a family reunion when you didn't go. In the last 6-7 months, we started eating a meal together every Tuesday night. We all took turns hosting the meals, and we also took turns. Individuals who wanted to lead could lead the Bible study if they wanted to. Just really showing how much we grew as people. It was really neat to sit back and watch. When we first started, like I said, it was such an eclectic mix. Some people were a little more comfortable talking about their faith. Others of us, like me, were really still fairly new to the faith. And over that time, we went from, it was hard to get people to even pray out loud on those first few years, and to the point where people were volunteering to lead the Bible study. Just really showed how much God was growing and using us and preparing us for whatever there may be for us to be there out there next. One thing we did do, some of you may or may not know, a group of us did go on a missions trip. We felt called that we should do something to help out. So we did go to New Orleans and help out. We went and helped do work on a house for a gentleman who was going to be a youth pastor in an area. And so before he could buy the house, before the bank would even give him the money to buy the house, he had to have repairs done so it would pass the home inspection. So we went down there for a week. A group of us did, and we did everything from clean out bird poop infested insulation to put in windows to even did some wiring work for him. And we found out he did pass the home inspection and was able to buy the house and become an important part of that community. Lastly, when we felt it was time for our group to disband, we decided that we were going to have one last Christmas party. We had a Christmas party every year. And this year, we just really felt that we should do something. So as a group, we adopted a family that had 4 kids and 2 adults, and we'll just say we'll make it a Christmas that they won't forget. Those of us that could gave, went out and bought presents. At the Christmas party, we divided up into groups, so each group had a person that they wrapped for, one of the 6, and it still probably took us 45 minutes to wrap all the presents. So we definitely wanted to make sure that we went out, showing God's love as a group is one of the last things that we did. And I know personally, I know everybody else, we talked about when it was time for the group to be over, that it was hard. It was, almost like going through a breakup. But we all definitely feel that God has grown all of us through this experience. And if you listen to those names that I read off, almost every one of those people is on some kind of a committee. We're all we've all grown to become very involved in the church and very involved on committees. And, we're here doing all kinds of extra stuff. Just growing as a Christian, we've all realized how important it is for us to step out and do things for our church. And I think that's one of the things that that we're going to leave our group on, knowing that we've grown so much to understand how important charity is and how important it is to help out our family members in Christ.
Thanks, Eric. Eric alluded to the fact that Patty and I are the oldest people in the group. Different people would occasionally accuse me of helping Moses carry the commandments down the mountain or getting off the ark with Noah, things like that. Hate to tell you, but I'm not that old. As the group continued to meet, life happened. Eric told you about the growth of the group numerically and some of the things about the spiritual growth in people, but folks changed jobs. A couple of the couples moved out of town, one to up near Swayze, one to Parker City, and so that's about an hour on a good day's drive between those 2 points. So we got to be a little bit more spread out, which was one difficulty. We were bursting the seams of our house. If everybody came, there were 14 to 16 of us, and we've got a nice house, and it's a good-sized house, but that's too many people to fit into our living room. And so we began to wonder what we were going to do. Eric said at the beginning there were no children, just 20 and 30-somethings, single or married. And by the end, there were a bunch of little tukas running around, and we tried to figure out, okay, how are we going to handle this? And we tried having babysitters in one room of the house and do the study in another room, and that didn't work. The toddlers were not happy. The moms and or dads ended up in the same room with them, so it was like, well, there's no sitter there. We tried having kids in with us during the study, and that had mixed results. Some people thought that was okay, and others thought, it just isn't getting it. So frustrations began to mount, and we began to think, well, what are we going to do? And we really kind of felt like we hit a wall probably in the spring of this year. And so we decided to begin a discernment process that Wade had put together. And he gave me this stuff, and I was leading us through that, and the frustrations continued to mount. We weren't really getting anywhere. We developed this big, long list of stuff that we needed to figure out solutions for, and about the third time, Wade said, I'd be glad to come and meet with you guys and help you guys. I said, yeah, we need you to come and help us do this. So he came and met with us for about 6 to 8 weeks over this last summer, and after a while, we developed this question to consider and to determine a solution to. The question is, reflecting on what God has taught us, how is he calling this group to action so that our efforts might be expanded for the benefit of the church and the community? And so as we wrestled with that question over the next month and a half or so, we came to develop a statement which reflects the direction we believe the Lord was leading us at that time and still is. And this statement that we developed is as follows: God is calling some of us to step out of this existing group in order to begin or lead new groups in our church, perhaps missional groups. Some of us feel that God has called us to stay as this group. This will open the group to others, allowing the group to be accessible so that they may be discipled as we have been. And that really reflected the place to which the group had come. There were a number of people in the group who said, yes, I feel like the Lord is asking me to be in a leadership position at this point. And we particularly expressed concern for ministries in the area of students, marriage relationships, and poverty. And it remains to be seen how the Lord is going to lead into those areas, lead us as a whole congregation in those areas as well. Also, as Eric said, I want to reiterate, there were people at the beginning of the group who stated, when it comes to prayer time, don't ask me to pray out loud. It isn't happening. Well, by the time the group ended 4 years later, those very people were regularly praying out loud and leading the group or small groups within the group in prayer as we prayed together. So we saw a lot of growth in our lives spiritually, emotionally, depending on each other. Patty and I don't have family. Well, we have Mom here with us in here in Muncie, but our kids are scattered across the country. Our grandkids are scattered across the country. And it's a blessing for us how the Lord has provided children and grandchildren here for us. One of our nicknames, at least one that we know about, are Tiger Nana and Tiger Papaw. We don't know some of the other nicknames there might be, but I'm sure they're there. So that's just a little bit of where we have been and where we are going, and the Lord, through this discernment process, has helped us to deal with a lot of different feelings. I think we all experienced a little bit of grief as we realized the group, as it has been over these 4 years, is coming to an end. So there was some apprehension about what's gonna take its place. Some fears about what is our role going to be, who's going to lead what am I going to lead, just how's all this going to work out. But the Lord is with us, And we're confident that he's going to make all of that clear, and he has a place for each of us to serve him and continue to grow in our relationships with him. And so Colleen is going to come and tell us what's going on next.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning. My name is Colleen Massoth, and my husband and I have been coming here, I think since about January of '09. And as Eric has stated before, a lot of us have gotten involved in the church more, and so I've probably pestered quite a few of you about volunteering in the nursery. For those of you who I haven't, watch out. I will get there. But to pick up where Tim left off, the discernment process over the summer started off, I felt like it was just kind of a mess. We had all kinds of ideas of where we thought we should go, but we just didn't know how to get there. And I think it was hard for all of us because we really did care deeply about each other and just the group as a whole, and it was hard for us to think about having to split off and who was going to go where and what was going to happen. Throughout the process, I just want to say again the question that we asked ourselves. Tim has said earlier, but I just think it's so awesome that we asked this question before, obviously before we knew where we were going, and God, just specifically answered what we asked, and it was reflecting on what God has taught us. How is he calling this group to action so that our efforts might be expanded for the benefit of the church and the community? And like I said, God was just at work. And it was his perfect timing that allowed Matt and Wade to go to a conference that specifically pertained to what we were working on, kind of growing small groups and just growing opportunities within the church where everybody has a place to be plugged in. And the conference was about missional communities. And after several meetings as a group, we really felt that a missional community was the answer to our question. And just a quick, without overloading you, because there's so much information that can come with all this, a missional community is a group of people with a particular focus who are on mission with God in our church, our community, our state, and even nationwide. And it really can provide so many opportunities for us as individuals as well as a church to reach out and serve others, which, like I said, I thought that was just awesome because it really did answer our question of how can we take what we have learned and how we grew and use it in our church and in our community. And it was just perfectly timed that right when we needed to move on and know what the next step was, God provided an answer for us. So the next step was digging into the setup of a missional community and discussing what that would look like for our church. We formed a team of 5 people, myself, Heather Headley, Tim Steigers, Wade, Dave Rodriguez, and we did a little bit more research into missional communities and exactly how they work. And throughout this whole process, the one thing we did know is that we wanted to be obedient. We wanted to not just say, well, this is what we want and this is what we think and this is how it should be. We really wanted to have our minds and our hearts open to God and just do what he wanted us to be doing next. And week after week, God guided our discussions, helping us to see what our needs were as a church. And missional communities can provide, like I said, a lot of different outlets for the young, for older people, for people who have special interest in marriage or poverty or students. So there's really something for everybody. And we really did feel as a team that this new direction is God's will. The missional communities is a newer concept, especially here in the United States, but it's also very exciting. And personally, you guys have no idea how thrilled I am to be a part of this setup. And it's a very humbling to know that, God is just bringing all of this to us and allowing us to be a part of it, and just providing this opportunity for our church, and just not only growth in numbers, but growth spiritually and in our faith. And looking back over the last year, I can see all the stones God laid for us to be right where we are now. And I just want to praise God and just say what an awesome God we have for that. I really think there are great things in store for our church in doing missional communities. I know we'll be stronger as a church family, and the opportunities to help others and spread the gospel in the community will be endless. Our church will be growing, and we will be growing in our faith. We don't have everything planned out perfectly. This is a kind of a trial and error, and let's see kind of what happens, and let's all kind of go through it together type thing. But we will walk through this together as a church and learn and grow from any mistakes, listening to our God all along the way. And I really hope that you guys will be as eager as I am to get started, especially those of you who might be new or might not feel like there's anywhere for you to be plugged in. This is really going to open the door for you. So I invite you all to save the date on January 9th, and we will have an open discussion about missional communities and kind of the pilot missional community that we're going to do here at the church. We will be answering any questions. And also you will be able to be a part and have a say in kind of where you want to sign up or be plugged into our pilot and go from there. So thank you, and I hope to see you all there.
I didn't plan to say this, but it is kind of interesting how God moves, and we are in an old church, right? It's been around a long time, and there have been different ministries that have happened in the life of our church, and ministries that have stopped, and ministries that continued on, other ministries that began. And one night in one of our meetings, I went upstairs into the Bicota Sunday School class and found an old scrapbook. And we borrowed it. We didn't take it. We borrowed it. But I brought it down to my office, and we began to flip through a scrapbook that was nearly 50 years old. And we began to see a lot of the similarities of what this group is going to be doing and what that Bicota class did as it began. And it's still going. So it's interesting to see that the transition of how things move in time. I want to share with you a story. I grew up in Georgia. And as part of my growing up, I developed a love for the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, that's no secret to most of you, right? As a small child, my dad would take me to Athens, to his alma mater, and I would watch them play football. I still remember sitting in front of the TV set in 1981, watching the Georgia Bulldogs play the Notre Dame Fighting Irish as Herschel Walker plowed through that end zone. I was 7 years old, still remember that. Some would say those were the glory days for the University of Georgia. When I was in high school, I worked in a pharmacy and delivered medication, and I would time my routes around the Georgia Bulldog games so I'd be able to listen to it. I'd listen to Larry Munson calling those Georgia games while I drove around in my non-air-conditioned S10 pickup truck delivering medication. Part of the deal also was, working in that pharmacy, we got all the ice cream and candy that we wanted for free. It was part of our deal. And so I'd always have a milkshake and a Snickers bar and listen to Larry Munson riding around. I lost my place there, sorry. This year's been a good year for Georgia. They have done well, and not too long ago I was bragging to Roger Morency about how well they were doing, and I invited myself over to his house to watch them play the South Carolina Gamecocks. I was really proud and hoping Georgia was going to show up that night, and they didn't. If you watch that game, Georgia got clobbered. It seemed like all hopes for a national championship for Georgia were over. It would take particular teams beating other teams. It would take Georgia knocking off then number 3 Florida. It would take Kansas State and Oregon getting beat for Georgia to even have a chance at the national championship. But it all happened. And sure enough, Georgia had one more thing to step over in order to play in that national championship game, and that was the SEC championship game against Alabama. It would be on December 1st at 4:30. And I remembered I had a wedding on that day. So I checked my calendar quickly, and I saw the wedding was at 2:30. I thought, whew, there's plenty of time for me to get done with the wedding and make it over to the game. And then the next week, Heather informed me that the time was wrong on the church calendar and that the wedding started at 4:30. I debated, what am I going to do now, right? I really didn't debate, but Debbie Gregg asked me, she's the wedding coordinator, and she said, have you decided to cancel the wedding? I said, yeah, the bride was devastated when I told her I wasn't going to be able to make it. But no, I didn't cancel. So I had a friend who agreed to put the game on a DVR on delay, and so I turned off my cell phone for all updates, and I made sure no one told me what was happening. I'd never done this before. My family made jokes about I would be in the wedding listening to the Georgia game while I was trying to perform the wedding. I don't think that would go too well, right? I mean, a football game and a wedding, two entirely different occasions. And while it took a bit of discipline for me to focus on the wedding, knowing that while I'm standing here, the ball game is going on, I needed to be totally present at the wedding. Just a side note, the bride asked me, I was hoping to get out of here quickly, you know. She said, would you dismiss every row for me? And so I had to dismiss every row, all 200 people, before I could leave the... It was very hard. But I did. I stayed focused on the wedding. But as soon as the wedding was over, I rushed out to my friend's house to watch the game, and I quickly changed from a suit and tie to jeans and a sweatshirt. It was time for the football game. It was no longer time for the wedding. You see, this story is just a story, but it illustrates, I think, the struggle to be present in the time and in the occasion that we needed to be present, that I needed to be present in at the time. In the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon wrote about this dynamic. Solomon was, as you know, the wisest man who ever lived, and he wrote this in Ecclesiastes 3. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And then in verse 11, he says, He, speaking of God, has made everything beautiful in His time. God, in His time, has made everything beautiful. And the challenge for you and me is to discover what God is doing in His time and then join Him in that. Too often, we're distracted by our own agendas. We've already figured out what we're doing, right? And we want God to join us in our efforts, but really it requires a shifting of our worldview, shifting of our thought, to say, God, what would you want for me in 2013? Here we are, the last Sunday of the new year. Maybe you have New Year's resolutions. Maybe you want to make more money or exercise or change bad habits. I'm not sure what your New Year's resolutions might be. But let me challenge you this morning as we think about 2013, as we think about the new year, to ask God, what would you want of me in 2013? How would you want me to be a part of what you're doing? And can I join you in that? As this small group has discovered, it was a difficult time for them last year as they transitioned and thought about the fact that God might be calling them to a different sort of ministry. You know, we don't like to change very much in church, do we? We like to keep doing it the same way over and over again. But God might be calling us into something new, and we need to be attentive. We need to be listening for that. This group today, I think, has shared their story, but it's also our story, isn't it? Every one of us. That we would be attentive. What do you want, God, next year? How can I join you in that? So we're going to ask you to do something a little bit different here in just a minute. I want to point this out too. One more little brief story. I didn't plan to do this, but on the way I was riding in this morning, and I thought, here we are, the last Sunday of 2012, and this church has been around for, 152, 3 years now, long time, and there have been many generations who've celebrated their new year in this building. And so as I got to church this morning, I walked down to the archives, and I pulled out that book that's sitting on the table right there. That's a church record from 100 years ago, from December of 1912. And I just thought, I wonder what was going on 100 years ago around here. And I read in there about a girl named Helen who was baptized. And I thought of Levi being baptized today. And I don't know what Helen looked like. I don't even know how young Helen was. But I thought for a minute there, isn't that kind of cool? But 100 years ago, a little girl named Helen was baptized. And today, a little boy named Levi was baptized. And maybe 100 years from now, there's going to be somebody else baptized. And time moves on. And the years come and the years go. And we have to ask ourselves as a congregation and individually, will we be faithful? Will we be faithful to do what God's calling us to do next year and the next year? So this morning, we're going to ask you to do something different. There's a few more here than I thought would be here today on a holiday weekend, but it's still a small group that's gathered here. And I'm going to ask you to participate this morning. We don't come to church to sit in a pew and observe. That's what you do at a movie theater, right? But at church, you are active in the worship service. And I'm going to ask you to be active in a minute here. I'd like for you to stand up, and I'd like you to get with 3 or 4 people, maybe just your family, if you're here with your family, maybe some people that you know, maybe somebody that you don't know. And I'd like for you to find out just the name of the people in the group and just say a sentence prayer for the person to your right, and just go around the circle. You don't have to do this long prayer, just a sentence prayer. God, would you help Tim to be attentive to you in 2013? Would you walk with him? Would you guide him? Would you lead him in your way in 2013? And then the next person, pray for the next person. And so everybody in the room is prayed for by someone else this morning. So let's all stand up together, join with 3, 4, 5 people, whoever you're with, and take just a minute and say that sentence prayer for someone that you're with, and then find a seat and we'll come back. All right, I think everyone is done now. If we'll just kind of return to your seats, and everybody will stand up with me. Cynthia is going to come now and lead us in a hymn. We're going to sing this together. And it's an opportunity for you to respond as we sing this hymn and as we think about the new year. If there is a decision that you'd like to make, I'll be standing down front. If you'd like to come and pray at the altar this morning, you can do that. But let's all stand together.
Hymn number 8.